The Bad Religion 7-inch was recorded at a little place called Studio 9, which was sort of like a little demo studio that a lot of the punk bands used. It was upstairs in an abandoned office building in downtown Hollywood, a really crappy area. It's actually above a drugstore. And it was on Sunset and Western, I think it was. Anyway, we went up there, we recorded, super cheap place. And all the rooms surrounding the studio and the upstairs of the office building were being squatted. And they all had tons of graffiti in them. So we did the natural thing. We got some spray paint. We spray painted Bad Religion everywhere. And then we went home with our tape. And we got a call from the management at the studio some days later saying they knew it was us and that we graffitied and we better come back and clean up all our graffiti or else we were going to be in big trouble. And we actually, this shows how young and naive we were, but we actually went back there, and this is so idiotic because I think what we did is we just spray painted over our paint with white paint, and there was graffiti everywhere else, anywhere, covering the floors and ceilings and trash everywhere. But anyway, we were dumb kids, and we went back and covered up all the Bad Religion graffiti. So How Could Hell Be Any Worse was the first record where we actually had a little bit of a plan before going to record. My friend Johnette worked at Gold Star Recording Studios as a receptionist. We met her when we mastered our 7-inch, and she recommended her boyfriend at the time to record a record. His name was Jim Mankey, and he's actually the brother of Earl Mankey, and the two of them actually used to be in the band Sparks. Anyway, so we brought in Jim to be our producer because he was actually a real recording engineer who had worked on things before. And having no money, we wrangled a deal where we could go into a little studio called Track Record. It was on Santa Monica Boulevard, and they let us get in there between midnight and the wee hours of the morning. So between midnight and 7 a.m. we could get in there for like no money. And so this album was recorded with Jim Mankey manning the knobs at Track Record between midnight and the morning hours on two recording sessions in a row. So two midnight sessions. And I can't even imagine how we did it now thinking back on it. The other notable thing about this record is that it started out with Jay Ziskraut on drums, and halfway through he quit, and then his roadie and friend Pete Finestone, who knew all the songs anyway because he hung out, said, "Hey, I can do it," and so he filled in on drums for the rest of the record. So this record actually has two drummers. It was all done over there at Track Record. I can remember that this was my first experience really trying to make a good recording. And I remember when Jim told us we were recording and he hit the record button and I saw that red light, that my ankles actually got weak. So this is a super controversial record. There's been a lot of conjecture about what the hell we were thinking when we made this record. In some cases by by band members like Jay. To me, this record was a creative departure that was really a terrible misstep on our part. Really just nothing more than showing our youthful naivety and inexperience. We were some kids in a punk band. We were getting popular. We had a creative direction and a vision. And of course, Greg and I had fairly diverse musical roots, and we were both into prog before we got into punk. You got to understand that prog back then was kind of music that you'd listen to if you were avant-garde. You could listen to, there was glitter rock and there was prog, and those were the alternatives to the mainstream. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of punk rockers sort of had prog bands as some of their early formative influences. Anyway, I used to listen to a lot of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, a lot of Genesis with Gabriel, a lot of Yes. Anyway, what I know now is none of this stuff has any bearing whatsoever on the creative direction of Bad Religion. But being like an 18-year-old, being a teenager in a successful band, we just figured that How Could Hell Be Any Worse was a fluke, and that the band wouldn't have longevity, and that basically anything we did, we could just, sort of have this sort of free-form creative output, and not much thought was put into it, to be honest. And so Greg and I came to the Hellhole. That was our little rehearsal garage where we made How Could Hell Be Any Worse, behind Greg's house, with our new songs. And it was sort of a bit of an escalation. Greg would play me a song, so I'd write a song like that. I'd play him a song, and before we knew it, we had an album that sounded, more like Pink Floyd or Jethro Tull than it sounded like How Could Hell Be Any Worse. Quite frankly, Jay and Pete, who weren't as involved in the writing process, were appalled. And I think after a brief, well, I'm not even sure exactly when it happened, but they presently quit the band as a result of us writing this stuff. And Greg and I enlisted the services of a phenomenal punk rock producer, Tom Wilson, who we respected for having done such seminal albums as the Adolescence Blue album, TSOL's Dance With Me, and we loved the sound of those early records. We hired Tom. Tom took us into a studio that he used called Perspective, which was an awesome room, the coolest studio we'd used up to that point. And Tom was an older guy. He was. We looked up to him, and he didn't tell us what we were doing was insane. So I think we just kind of, we just sort of went forward blindly. We made this record. We were a popular band by then in the scene, so we released our record. We shipped far more copies than we'd ever done, and we got every single one of them back right away. Everyone hated that record, and it was almost the end of us if it hadn't been for Greg, whose perseverance kept the band alive and kept touring, and pretty soon stopped playing those songs live and just focused on the group's popular material, which, as it should be, was the punk stuff. By the time we did Suffer, I had been working as a recording engineer at my own little studio, and I was probably working 100-hour weeks. The studio was $15 an hour. That included me as an engineer. And I was doing every band that could afford $15 an hour or not. I mean, I was literally working 7 days a week, 16 hours a day, sometimes more, and there was no money. I was, with the maintenance cost of the studios, I was probably making $5 an hour. And I was doing country bands, punk bands, downtown art bands, metal bands, blues bands. It didn't matter. I did every kind of band. But the cool thing about that is that I learned how to be a recording engineer. And so by the time the group got back together to do Suffer, I knew how to record. And it was really fun. We did Suffer in 8 days. And we worked the way I was accustomed to working, which was back then I would work, I'd go in at noon, and we'd work, and when we were done working, the sun was coming up. We'd literally work from noon till 7:30 in the morning, go home, sleep for 4 hours, and get back at noon or 1 and work. So we recorded Suffer in 7 or 8, probably 18, 19-hour days, record and mix, done. No Control, same deal as Suffer, recorded at the original West Beach Recorders, which was located in Hollywood, about a block from the Cathay de Grande, and about 100 yards from the back door of Raji's, a couple of Hollywood dives where all the bands used to play. Like Suffer, it was recorded down and dirty. It was recorded to tape. We had an old, I think it was a JCM, we had an old MCI tape machine. It was a 2-inch analog tape machine. We had an ATR, an Ampex ATR machine for the half-inch. Actually, Suffer was recorded on 1/4-inch tape, so I think No Control was the first record we actually did on half-inch 2-track, which was a big step up for us. Bill Stevenson from the Descendants told me about this really great box called the Compeller, made by Aphex. I put the whole record through it. I put everything, every track through that damn box, and I hated it. I thought it made everything sound weird. And then in the mix, I had to try and undo all the overcompression. But the truth is, now I think this record sounds super aggressive and super guitar-y, so it's, it gave it a distinctive sound. Against the Grain was the third record recorded at the original West Beach Recorders location over on Vista Del Mar. On this record, we started to sort of expand our songwriting a little bit and started to sort of also expand recording techniques a little bit. We did things like the breakdown section at the end of Anesthesia, and then the the screams in the song for Get Off. I experimented a little bit with some effects and echoes, like, a little more than I'd done before. I guess you have to really pay attention to even notice now, but back then to do anything like that on a punk rock record was super controversial, and we started to just branch out a little bit. So pretty happy with the sound on that record. As were Suffer and No Control. We put that record through my old Soundcraft 2400 console, which had a great sound for guitars and drums. I had these little compressors called dynamites that I used for the snare and the kick drum, and lots of 57s and 87s, and those were microphones. We used to throw the guitars in a little closet. The studio itself was a house. It was a tiny little, not even a house, it was like a little duplex, and so we turned it into a recording studio, but we didn't have any ISO booths, so the guitar sound was derived by putting a half stack into a tiny coat closet and throwing a mic on it and filling the coat closet with dampening foam. So that's what we used to do back then. It gave a really tight, close guitar sound. So by the time we recorded Generator, West Beach Recorders moved. We were able to lease a building that had previously been occupied by the legendary studio called Producer's Workshop. Producer's Workshop is probably best known as being one of the foremost early hi-fi tracking and mixing rooms. It was owned by Doug Sachs, the proprietor of Mastering Lab, and designed all their own gear, and they designed all their own compressors and microphone preamplifiers. And anyway, this room was the place where they actually recorded, or they actually mixed a lot of Fleetwood Mac Rumors. They did Mother off Pink Floyd The Wall in that room. And so we were really lucky to get it. We didn't buy the building, but I was able to lease the space, and we moved West Beach's gear in there. And before the room was even properly set up, it was time to record Generator. And I wasn't familiar with the room yet. I didn't know how it sounded. I wasn't familiar with the board, which was a Trident Series 80B. An English console. And so Generator has always sounded a little weird to me because I didn't have my bearings in that room yet. And so I always thought that the drums sounded a little sharp and maybe a little too loud on that record. I almost feel that Generator, while it was a step forward in songwriting and the evolution of the band, that sonically it might have been a step backward, because I think the sound of the previous three records might have been a little bit better. At least I was a little happier with them. But it was the first thing we ever did in the new room, and the new West Beach Recorders. So thanks to my band for being the guinea pigs. Recipe for Hate was a record where we enlisted the help of our friend, an engineer named Paul Dugray. And Paul had recently done a record for the very amazing Los Lobos, a record that to this day is sonically one of my favorite records. It's called Kiko. And if you have a chance to pick up Los Lobos Kiko, check that out. But it was a phenomenal record. Paul was real busy doing a lot of records back then. And so we brought him in to do some of the engineering. And we tracked a lot of it at West Beach. But then we took the mixing over to a place called Brooklyn Studios, which interestingly was owned by Madonna, but it was a much fancier studio than we were ever. It was still completely analog. These were the days of tape, of course, but they had a big, long, I can't remember what kind of console. I think it might have been a Neve console, but far more channels than we were accustomed to having, and a lot more effects, and there was a lot more at our disposal there. But at the end of the day, I think it was a slightly weird-sounding room. But anyway, that was mixed with Paul over at Brooklyn Studios. Stranger Than Fiction was the first record where we ever hired an outside producer. The legendary and talented Andy Wallace. Andy is probably best known for doing Nirvana's Nevermind, which at the time of Stranger Than Fiction had just come out a little while before. He had also just completed a huge Rage Against the Machine record. He was on fire. But the thing about Andy Wallace was that he wasn't just some young upstart producer. I mean, going way back, he had worked with Donna Summers and Madonna, and he'd done every kind of music that you can imagine. He was actually sort of an older gentleman. He wasn't a kid our age, so we really looked up to him, and we felt that he was somebody we could let produce us. The way it came about was Andy's manager reached out to us and said, hey, Andy likes you guys. Would you like us to try out a mix? And if you like what Andy does, maybe you'd want him to produce you. And we were on tour at the time, so we arranged to have the multi-tracks of American Jesus sent to him. And he quickly did a mix and sent it back to us. In those days, it was impossible to just send links. I think he actually had to send a burn, which we listened to on the bus. And it sounded phenomenal. And in fact, I would kill to get a copy of that nowadays, because I don't have any idea whatever happened to that. But it wasn't on the record. It was just a test mix to show what he could do with our stuff. It sounded phenomenal. And God, I wish I still had a copy of that. Anyway, Andy produced this record. It has his signature sound. It was done at a place called Rumbo Recorders, a place where the Guns N' Roses did Appetite for Destruction, and also Jeff Lynne of ELO fame does a lot of work there. It's deep in the valley, the San Fernando Valley, but that's where we recorded with Andy. And then it was mixed out in Burbank at a place called the Enterprise. But it was a real pleasure working with him. He's a true gentleman. I learned a lot from him, and I'm grateful to him to this day. Really, really wonderful experience. So this was the big reunion, and I'd been out of the band for many years. I'd sort of, from time to time over the years kept my chops up as a producer-engineer. I'd done records for Mill & Cullen and Rancid, and some of those sounded quite good. I was still working with tape, although most engineers by this time were working exclusively digitally, Pro Tools or Cakewalk or Radar or something like that. And so this was the first record where we decided to use Pro Tools. We wanted to track in a bigger room. I was a huge fan of the live to two-track records done at Sound City, where an engineer named Billy Bowers was recording them for Frank Black. Frank Black did a number of these live to two-track records, and I just thought they sounded huge. And I knew that for Billy to get that kind of a sound, he had to be immensely talented. So I looked up Billy, and I asked him if he would like to be our tracking engineer for the record so I could focus more on playing. He agreed. And so we tracked Process of Belief over at Sound City, Billy Bowers Engineering, and then we did the overdubs at West Beach, which was now the second location of West Beach, where we started with Generator. Billy tracked all the overdubs. Billy was a expert Pro Tools engineer. And we tracked that entire record to tape and Pro Tools. So in other words, everything that we have on Pro Tools first went to tape. And the actual multi-track files on Pro Tools have analog duplicates on tape, which is pretty interesting. It's the only time we did that because it's twice as much work. But I think it's part of the reason that Process has such an amazing sound is that every single note on that record hit tape before it hit Pro Tools. I personally mixed that record. Actually, I guess I've mixed all the records other than Stranger Than Fiction, which was mixed by Andy Wallace. So with Process of Belief, I was back in the mixing seat, and I took it to a place called Larrabee East, which had a nice Neve console and tons of outboard gear, and I mixed Process of Belief at Larrabee. And one morning I came to work, and we turned on the TV in the studio, and the Twin Towers were falling. So I remember that. That's probably the most remarkable memory from mixing Process of Belief is that I mixed it during 9/11. And I remember, I mix alone. The band doesn't usually hang around. And I remember getting a call from Greg in New York saying, turn on your television. And I said, I'm already looking at it. This is our first record working with Joe Barresi. By this time, I was really getting out of the recording game. I wasn't spending much time at all as an engineer, producer, mixer. Epitaph was taking all my time. And so I'd always been a fan of Joe Barresi's work. I asked him if he'd like to produce Bad Religion, and we hit it off great from the get-go. That record, if I can remember correctly, I think we did it we went back to Sound City for drums. We were in Sound City Studio B for overdubs and mix. Sound City is a notable studio because that's where Nirvana Nevermind was recorded, actually. It wasn't mixed there, but that tracking room, that's my favorite drum room in the city. Actually, Nirvana Nevermind was tracked there. Tom Petty tracks all his stuff there, and Fleetwood Mac Rumors was notably tracked there. So New Maps of Hell was the first time we ever tracked drums at a place called Grand Master Recording Studios on Cahuenga in Hollywood. It's a very cool little studio. You wouldn't even know it was there. But a lot of bands use it. It has a fantastic tracking room. It's one that's completely made of cement. It's very lively. And they have the same exact Neve console that they have at Sound City. So I like the sound of those old Neves, and we had that there, and Joe was comfortable working there. So we did the tracking there, and then we took the overdubs. Well, we did all the music. We did the tracking and the overdubs there, and then we took did all the background vocals in my place. The bonus material on New Maps of Hell Deluxe was a lot of fun to make. Greg and I both enjoy writing songs on acoustic, and we also enjoy playing acoustic guitars together and going over our songs together on acoustic and working out harmonies and melodies and so forth. And so it was a chance for us to sort of share a bit of our process with the fans, and also to work on some songs that may or may not turn out to be cuts on the new Bad Religion studio LP. And as it turns out, I think a few of them will. And in fact, we've been playing one of them live, and I'm hoping that we can work out arrangements to some more of them for the new album that's coming up. So it was a fun project overall, and hopefully it gave some of the longtime fans a little bit of insight into Greg and my process.